The Dusty Arrival. The sun, a fiery anvil, hammered down on Dusty Thorn as he guided Rusty, his ancient mare, into the parched maw of Dry Gulch. Fine, silken dust, like powdered ochre, plumed with every weary hoof fall, draping everything in its uniform pallor. Dusty's stomach protested with a hollow growl, a stark echo of days on meager rations. His own worn leather chaps felt lighter than usual, mirroring the emptiness in his pockets. He surveyed the desolate main street, a scattering of weather-beaten shacks and a saloon whose vibrant paint had long since bleached into submission. The air hung thick and still, redolent with dried sage and the silent burden of hardship. The town was hushed, unnervingly so. No boisterous laughter spilled from the saloon's doors, no rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer broke the stillness. A lone hound, ribs stark beneath its matted pelt, observed their slow advance from the meager shade of a sagging porch. This was no bustling hub of opportunity, no vibrant promise. This was a place holding its breath, a town perpetually awaiting a whisper of rain or a stroke of luck that remained stubbornly out of reach. His gaze drifted, snagging on a small, fenced enclosure beside the general store. A crudely scrawled sign, tacked to a splintered post, proclaimed, "Horse for sale, $1." Beneath it stood an equine wraith. The creature was a testament to neglect, ribs sharply defined, coat dull and patchy, head bowed low in perpetual resignation. Yet, its eyes, though clouded with despair, held a faint spark, a flicker of tenacious life clinging to the very precipice of extinction. Dusty felt a familiar pang in his chest. He understood that gnawing desperation, that feeling of being unwanted, a dollar store discard. He nudged Rusty to a halt, his hand instinctively gravitating toward the meager coin pouch at his belt. It was a foolish impulse, a reckless whim. He barely possessed enough for himself and Rusty. Still, he could not avert his gaze from the forlorn creature. $1's worth of hope. The mare stood in the dusty corral, a skeletal outline against the fading afternoon sun. Ribs showed like a washboard, and her coat, once a rich bay, was matted with burrs and caked mud. Most folks in Redemption just shook their heads, seeing only a bag of bones destined for the knackers. Dusty, however, saw something different. He moved slowly, deliberately, his boots crunching on the dry earth, until he was close enough to smell the faint, sour scent of neglect and fear. Her head hung low, but as Dusty neared, she lifted it with a tired effort. Her eyes, though dull, held a flicker, a deep, ancient intelligence that caught his gaze and held it. It wasn't pity he felt, not entirely. It was a strange, undeniable pull, as if an invisible thread connected his quiet spirit to hers. He reached out a hand, palm open, and after a moment of hesitation, she nudged it gently with her muzzle. A spark, a tiny ember in the vast ash of her defeat, seemed to ignite. "You're not done yet, are you?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble. A couple of townsfolk, lounging by the general store, watched with amused skepticism. "Still got some fight left, I reckon." He turned to the store owner, a man named Silas, whose face was a roadmap of cynical wrinkles. "How much for her, Silas?" Silas snorted, spitting a stream of tobacco juice. "$1. If you can even get her to stand long enough to lead her away. Reckon she's more trouble than she's worth." Dusty reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the worn silver coin. His last $1. It was enough for a meal, maybe 2 cups of coffee, but he looked at the mare again, at the faint glow in her eyes. "I'll take her," he said, handing the coin over. A ripple of low chuckles followed his declaration. "Fool and his money," someone muttered. But Dusty ignored them. He stroked the mare's rough mane. "Star," he whispered, the name feeling right, like a promise whispered into the wind. "You look like you need a new beginning." Whispers and doubts. A murmur, then a ripple of outright laughter, spread through the dusty street. The townsfolk, a motley collection of weathered ranchers, gossiping seamstresses, and wide-eyed children, pointed openly at Dusty and the emaciated horse beside him. "$1 for that," shouted Hiram, the blacksmith, his booming voice cutting through the snickers. "You've finally lost your marbles, Thorn." Star, sensing the derision, lowered her head, a shiver running through her thin frame. Dusty's jaw tightened, but he kept his gaze steady on the path ahead. He could feel the heat of their judgment, the weight of their collective amusement pressing down on him, yet he refused to meet their mocking eyes. He knew what they saw, a skeletal nag, a fool's bargain. He also knew what they didn't. Mayor Jedediah Stone, a man whose waistcoat strained against his ample belly, emerged from the general store, a half-eaten pickle clutched in his hand. He surveyed the scene, a condescending smirk on his face. "Well, well, if it isn't our resident visionary," he drawled, his voice thick with sarcasm. He squinted at Star. "That thing wouldn't even make good glue, Thorn. $1 wasted, plain and simple." He took a loud, wet bite of his pickle, the sound a punctuation mark to his dismissal. The laughter swelled again, hotter and more stinging this time. A few children, emboldened by their elders, mimicked Star's weary gait, prancing and whinnying mockingly. Dusty felt a flicker of anger, a hot spark in his chest, but he quelled it. There was no point in arguing with a tide of ignorance. He tugged gently on Star's lead rope, his touch a silent reassurance. The mare, surprisingly, responded with a faint tilt of her head, as if acknowledging his unspoken promise. Without a word, Dusty turned his back on the jeering crowd. The taunts followed him, whispers and outright guffaws clinging to his retreating figure like burrs. He kept his stride even, his shoulders straight, guiding Star past the saloon's swinging doors, past the storefronts where faces pressed against glass, until the sounds of their amusement began to fade into the general hum of the afternoon. The road ahead was long, and for now, it was just him and Star, walking away from the doubts. A cowboy's kindness. Dusty led Star to a small, secluded copse of cottonwoods beside a trickle of a creek, a place he knew would offer some shelter and privacy. The mare moved with a painful stiffness, each step a testament to her neglect. He tethered her loosely to a low branch, ensuring she could still reach the sparse grass, then rummaged in his saddlebag for the worn brush he always carried. He approached her slowly, speaking in a low, even tone. "Easy now, girl. Just gonna make you feel a little better." Star flinched as the bristles first touched her matted coat, her eyes wide with a fear born of past unkindness. Dusty paused, letting his hand rest gently on her neck, just behind her ear. He waited, feeling the tremor beneath his palm, until her breathing softened slightly. Then, he resumed, working with a methodical patience that belied the urgency of her condition. Each stroke dislodged clumps of dirt, burrs, and tangled hair, revealing patches of dull, unkempt hide. He worked around her tender spots, taking care not to cause further pain. Once the worst of the grime was gone, he offered her a handful of oats he'd been saving. She eyed them suspiciously at first, then took a tentative nibble. Dusty sat on his heels, watching her eat, noting the way her ears flicked, not in alarm, but in a hesitant acknowledgement of his presence. He spent the rest of the afternoon there, occasionally stroking her flank, murmuring soft words. He didn't expect a miracle, not yet, but he felt a shift. A subtle softening in her demeanor. By sundown, when he finally pulled out his own meager supper, Star was grazing calmly, a quiet trust beginning to bloom in the weary depths of her eyes. He knew this was just the beginning, but it was a start. A good one. Star's transformation. The weeks bled into months, each sunrise finding Dusty at Star's side. The ribs that had once protruded like a washboard slowly receded, replaced by a sleek, muscular curve. The dull, matted coat, once the color of stale mud, now shimmered with the deep, rich sheen of polished mahogany, catching the morning sun in fiery glints. Her eyes, no longer clouded with despair, sparkled with an intelligent, almost knowing light, reflecting the vast prairie sky. Dusty would run a calloused hand along her neck, feeling the vibrant energy beneath the smooth hair, a stark contrast to the brittle bones he'd first encountered. He often found her standing at the fence, ears swiveling, eyes fixed on the distant horizon, a quiet intensity in her stance. It was more than just regained health, it was an awakening. He saw it in the way she moved, no longer a hesitant shuffle, but a powerful, purposeful stride, even within the confines of the paddock. There was a coiled spring of strength in her hindquarters, a resilience in her spirit that belied her past suffering. He'd catch her watching him, a silent question in her gaze, and a profound sense of connection would settle between them. One crisp afternoon, while mending a loose plank, Dusty paused, feeling Star's warm breath on his nape. He turned to find her nose nudging his hand, a soft wicker rumbling in her chest. There was no demand, no expectation, just a profound, unspoken acknowledgement. He reached up, stroking her forehead between her soft ears, feeling the pulse of life beneath his fingertips. In that moment, the isolation that had often clung to him like dust on a dry road seemed to dissipate, replaced by a quiet companionship. The dollar he'd paid for her felt like the greatest bargain of his life, a single coin exchanged for something invaluable and enduring. Their bond was a silent language, woven from shared sunrises and gentle trust. The storm's fury. A strange, coppery scent, like old pennies left in the sun, tickled Dusty Thorne's nose. He looked up from where he was patching a tear in his saddlebag, squinting. The brilliant blue sky that usually lorded over Dry Gulch was bruised, a sickly yellowish-orange bleeding in from the west. The air grew heavy, pressing down on the town like a physical weight. Then, a low rumble, not of thunder, but something deeper, rattled the windows of the saloon. A distant wall of churning ochre emerged, stretching from horizon to horizon, devouring the sun. "Dust storm," someone shrieked, the words torn by the first gust of wind that whipped through the dusty street, sending hats tumbling and shutters slamming. Panic erupted like a burst dam. Townsfolk, who moments before had been idly chatting or tending their chores, scattered. Women clutched children, men wrestled with flapping canvas awnings, and horses whinnied in terror, straining against their tethers. The roaring wind escalated, a banshee's wail, carrying grit that stung the eyes and grated against teeth. Dusty pulled his bandana over his face, instinctively heading for the sturdy stable. He could barely see a foot in front of him, the world dissolving into a maelstrom of swirling sand. Through the chaos, a frantic cry pierced the din. "Lily May! Has anyone seen Lily May?" It was Mrs. Perkins, her voice thin and reedy, battling the gale. A collective gasp rippled through the few people huddled near the general store. Lily May Perkins, all 7 years of curious mischief and boundless energy, had been playing near the old water pump just moments before. The storm, a monstrous, blinding entity, had swallowed her whole. Dusty's heart lurched. He knew Lily May, a brave, imaginative girl who loved to explore, but easily overwhelmed. Now, she was lost in the storm's furious embrace. A hero's ride. The frantic cries of "Lily's gone" sliced through the already strained air of the ranch. Dusty, who had been tightening a loose fence post, froze. His gaze flickered to the churning ochre wall that was the approaching dust storm, then back to the distraught faces of the ranch hands. Lily. He knew her, the little sprout of sunshine who always had a kind word, even for him, the quiet cowboy. A knot tightened in his stomach. He didn't need to be told twice. He moved with a speed that belied his usual measured pace, striding towards the makeshift corral where Star, his peculiar mare, stood. Star's ears twitched, her intelligent eyes, usually a placid brown, now held a glint of something akin to knowing. Dusty didn't hesitate. He swung himself onto her back, the familiar creak of the old leather saddle a small comfort amidst the rising panic. "Lily," he muttered, not to Star, but to the swirling chaos ahead. "Find her." Star didn't need a spur, didn't need a firm pull on the reins. She seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, the invisible urgency that pulsed between them. With a powerful snort, she lowered her head, her magnificent mane whipping around her neck like a banner in the gathering gale. Then, with a surge of raw power, she launched herself forward, not away from the storm, but directly into its heart. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of gritty orange and blinding brown. The wind shrieked, a banshee's wail that threatened to rip the very air from Dusty's lungs. Dust stung his eyes, filled his nostrils, and coated his tongue. He hunched low, clinging to Star's sturdy neck, trusting her implicitly. She was no ordinary horse, and this was no ordinary ride. This was a desperate gamble, a hero's ride into the inferno, guided only by hope and the extraordinary bond they shared. Each thundering hoofbeat was a prayer, echoing the singular thought in Dusty's mind, Lily. Found in the dust. The world had become a swirling vortex of ochre and gray. Star, however, moved with an uncanny certainty. Her ears, swiveling like radar dishes, sifted the howl of the wind from the faint, desperate whimpers carried on the gale. Her large, intelligent eyes, though seeing little more than a blur of dust, tracked an invisible path, guided by instinct honed over generations. She lowered her head, sniffing the ground even as grains stung her nostrils, a primal GPS mapping the shifting earth. Suddenly, Star stopped. She whinnied, a short, sharp sound that cut through the storm's roar, and began to paw the ground with an insistent hoof. Dusty, bent double against the wind, squinted through the flying grit. He followed Star's gaze, his heart a tight knot in his chest. Just a few feet away, a small, dark bundle lay half buried in a drift of sand. He stumbled forward, dropping to his knees beside the tiny form. It was Lily May, curled into a fetal position, her small hands clutching a dusty rag doll. Her face was streaked with tears and grime, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Lily May, Dusty murmured, his voice rough with emotion. He gently scooped her up, amazed at how feather-light she felt. She trembled violently, burying her face into his shoulder. "It's all right, little one," he soothed, his hand stroking her tangled hair. "You're safe now." He carried her back to Star, whose immense form offered a small, blessed windbreak. Carefully, he settled Lily May onto the mare's broad back, positioning her just in front of the saddle. Star stood patiently, a silent, unmoving anchor in the chaos. With Lily May secured, Dusty gripped the reins. The journey back would be slow, but the worst of the terror was over. Destiny's embrace. The last vestiges of the storm's fury still whipped through Havenwood as Dusty, leading Star, emerged from the dense, rain-soaked woods. Lily, a small, brave bundle, clung to Dusty's back, her face streaked with tears and mud but her eyes wide with relief. A collective gasp, then a roar of cheers, erupted from the gathered townsfolk. Lanterns, like scattered fireflies, illuminated the anxious faces of Havenwood. Mayor Jedediah Stone, his usually stern features softened by genuine relief, pushed through the crowd. "Dusty. Lily. You brought her back." He clapped Dusty on the shoulder, a rare display of public affection from the stoic mayor. "And Star, that magnificent creature. We owe you both more than words can say." His gaze lingered on the horse, a profound respect dawning in his eyes. The townsfolk murmured agreement, their previous skepticism about Dusty and his dollar horse dissolving into admiration. Lily, once safely in her mother's arms, pointed a small, muddy finger at Star. "He was so brave, Mama. He found me." Dusty merely nodded, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. He looked at Star, whose flank still trembled slightly from exertion, but whose eyes, usually so wary, now met his with an undeniable trust. It wasn't just a horse he'd bought for $1, it was a partner, a protector, a true friend. The world, which had felt so vast and lonely just days ago, now seemed to hold a defined path, a purpose etched in the loyal gaze of his horse. The whispers of "lone cowboy" no longer felt like a curse, but a prelude. His destiny, once a hazy, distant concept, now rode beside him, four-legged and steadfast, under the approving gaze of Havenwood. His life, irrevocably, had changed.